We are live. Hello and welcome, everybody. I am super excited. Taxes is not fun to do, especially if you're a student and if you're new to the country. But it is an important thing to get it done. And, we have Elvira. We did this last year and it was one of the best sessions that we have done. I still get people asking like, hey, are you guys doing session this time? And I was like, yes, we are. So Elvira, welcome back. And maybe you can do a quick intro before we get started.
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks for having me, Udi. And it's great to hear tax being called one of your best sessions. That's brilliant. But yeah, my name is Elvira King, and I'm an account manager here at Sprintax, and I've worked with Sprintax for I suppose about 8 years now, helping with non-resident tax compliance. Preparing federal and state tax returns is what Sprintax does for non-resident international students and scholars. So ensuring that you're tax compliant.
Amazing. For those of you who are just joining, we do have some discounts that's going to come your way. So stay tuned for the presentation. Elvira, maybe we can do a quick agenda. What are we going to cover? And then you can get it started.
Of course, absolutely. So we're going to have a look at the basic principles of non-resident tax. So things like, am I resident or non-resident for tax? Who needs to file? We'll look at the different income documents that you might receive. We'll look at things like FICA and ITIN so that you're familiar with those things. And we'll also look at the implications of filing incorrectly or maybe not filing at all and what you need to do in those situations. And then towards the end, I'll provide a quick overview of what it looks like when you sit down to prepare your taxes with Sprintax and kind of guide you through those steps so that you're familiar with that and you're comfortable with it when you do sit down to prepare your taxes.
Amazing. Cool. Someone just said they couldn't hear me, so that gave me a little mini panic attack. But it looks like everything is good to go. For everyone, we are recording this, so you will get access to the recording. We'll send you an email right after this with the discount codes and links and details you need. Elvira is going to walk through this. The format is going to be she's going to talk through the whole session, but then I'm going to monitor the chat and then come back on live and ask any questions if you guys have any questions during the session, but we'll leave plenty of time to answer any questions that you may have, maybe about your situations, etc. Some we may be able to answer, some we may have to defer it, but again, we're going to try our best. So Elvira, take it away from us, and then look forward to the session.
Perfect. So let me just share my screen.
All right.
Okay, so let me know when you can see that. Is that showing okay?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. Great. So yeah, I suppose the aim of today is to give you kind of everything you need to know about non-resident tax and how to navigate the non-resident tax journey. I've already introduced myself, but Elvira King, I'm account manager here at Sprintax and delighted to be here with you all today. So thanks so much for coming along and tuning in. Great to have so many of you here. But yeah, as Udi mentioned, he has partnered with Sprintax to provide an exclusive offer for all of you guys. So make sure that you do use the code UDI at checkout to save $5 on the federal return fee. And I'll show you what that looks like a little later, as you're going through the Sprintax process. I'll show you exactly where to enter that code. But make sure to use that. That's going to save you $5. So in terms of a disclaimer, we would always start a session like this with a disclaimer, and I suppose because we're talking about tax, the aim of this presentation is to provide you with a general understanding of the tax principles as they apply to international students and scholars, and as such, it's for informational purposes only. Each individual has a unique tax position and is responsible for their own tax determination and compliance. So basically what we're saying there is that we can't give you individual tax advice on a session like this today. That is the job of the Sprintax software itself. But we'll definitely give you a good understanding of the tax principles as they apply so that you're familiar with that and you're comfortable with that. So I know we've already touched on the overview of what we'll cover today, but an overview of, kind of everything you need to know as a non-resident student or scholar in the US, understanding the implications of filing an incorrect tax return or maybe not filing at all. And then, of course, using Sprintax to prepare your tax return and what that looks like. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions and discussion at the end. But do feel free to submit your questions throughout. And Yudi, feel free to jump in at any stage. If there's a question relating to the topic I'm covering or whatever, jump in at any stage. I'm happy to answer as we go along as well. So I suppose one of the first things we'll look at then is the important dates for this season. And the tax year runs the same as the calendar year. So we're looking at any income that you've earned, any tax that was withheld on that income, and any days of presence between January 1st and December 31st, 2025. Another really important date, of course, then to be aware of is the tax filing deadline. And that date is April 15th, 2026. So that is the cutoff date for submitting your tax return. It is really important that you do get it submitted by that date. If it's a case you're late filing and you actually owe tax to the IRS, they can apply fees and penalties, and interest can accrue on that. So really important, do get your return submitted by that date. If you have everything you need, don't wait until closer to that date. Get it done as soon as you can. Get it out of the way. One less thing for you to be thinking about or worrying about, and at least then you can relax and enjoy. But April 15th is the tax filing deadline. So I suppose one of the first things we always look at when we're looking at non-resident tax is residency for tax purposes. And, the concept of residency for tax purposes, it can be confusing. So I'm going to break it down a little over the next slide or two. Hopefully you'll understand it a little clearer after this. But I suppose firstly, it's important to mention that residency for tax purposes, it's independent of your visa or immigration status. So you could actually be, you could be non-resident on your immigration status, but you could actually be considered resident for tax purposes. Because when it comes to resident for tax purposes, it's all based on the number of days that you've actually spent in the US. So generally, most international students or scholars on F, J, M or Q visas are considered non-resident for tax purposes. But the rule that the IRS follow is if you're an F1 or a J1 student, for example, generally you will be considered non-resident for the first 5 calendar years here in the US. After that 5-year period, then the IRS will use what's known as the substantial presence test. Now, that can sound a bit like a crazy maths equation, but the substantial presence test, it's looking at your days of presence over the last 3 years to determine your residency status. So it'll look at all of your days of presence in the year you're filing for, so we'll say 2025 in this case. It'll take 1/3 of your days of presence in the year before that, and 1/6 of your days of presence in the year before that. And if that totals to 183 days or more, then you would be deemed resident for tax purposes. Now, if you're considered resident for tax purposes, Sprintax won't allow you to proceed any further than step 1, as you would need to use a resident provider like our resident partner TurboTax. But of course, only if you are resident for tax purposes. And the good news there is that you don't need to worry about the calculations. Sprintax will work that out for you. So all you need to do is to enter your details into step 1 on Sprintax, and I'll show you what that looks like later. But we will then work it all out for you. Now, there's no fee for that, and I'll show you later as I go through that Sprintax overview, but you don't make a payment or enter a code or anything like that until you get to the very end of the process on Sprintax. So if anyone's unsure if you're resident or non-resident, just go in and complete step 1 and we'll work that out for you. Now, you've heard me mention there a calendar year. So if, for example, Yudi enters the US on December 30th, 2025, but his semester at his university doesn't start until February 2026, the IRS will actually count 2025 as Yudi's first year of presence in the US, even though he's only spent a couple of days in the US during that year. So just to be aware of that in terms of calendar years. Residency rules then, they change slightly for researchers or scholars on J visas. So if you're a researcher or scholar on a J visa, instead of that 5-year grace period where you're considered non-resident, you actually only get 2 years. And after you've been in the US then for 2 years on that J scholar or research visa, the IRS will then look at the substantial presence test. So this next slide then, it's just a quick residency summary. It outlines the different visa types, the number of years each visa type is exempt from the substantial presence test, and if there's a FICA exemption available. So you'll see here, for example, the F1 and J1 student are exempt from that substantial presence test for 5 calendar years and have that FICA exemption, whereas many of the other J1 categories then would fall under that 2-year rule. So, you will be able to look back over the recording of this session at any stage. If you do want to look into that in any more detail, you will have access to do so. So next we're looking at who must file. And this is a question we get on every webinar we do, and it comes through the live chat. And, this is something that we get asked so often. So really, really important to be aware that every non-resident who's an exempt individual must complete at least Form 8843, irrespective of income or days of presence. So everyone on this session today, if you were present in the US for any time at all during 2025 on an F, J, M or Q visa, even if you didn't receive any income, you need to submit Form 8843. It's the minimum filing requirement for all non-residents in the US. Now, if you have received any US income over $0, so any US income at all, it will trigger the federal filing requirement, which is the 1040 NR. Now, previously there was a personal exemption where you could earn up to a certain amount before it would trigger that filing requirement, but that has been abolished. So now anything you earn, US income over $0, will trigger that federal filing requirement. So really important to be aware, everyone on this session today needs to do something when it comes to taxes, minimum being that Form 8843. But if you have received any US income over $0, then you will trigger the federal filing requirement as well. So looking at some of those
Elvira,
incomes, yeah, of course,
sorry,
Judy, go ahead.
one quick question.
Of course.
Someone asked, what if we forget to fill Form 8843 previous year? Can we fix that? Is that fixable at all?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's something we're asked on every single session we do as well. So you're not alone. There's
Okay.
tons. And oftentimes, people are in the US for a couple of years maybe and don't realize they need to do anything. And it's only when they come on a session like this, they realize, oh God, I've been in the US and I didn't do anything at all. But yes, you absolutely can catch up, even if it is just Form 8843. And we would recommend that you do so. Now, Sprintax can assist with that. So if you need to catch up on a previous year and you want to use Sprintax, just go in, create your account on Sprintax, choose the year that you need to catch up on, answer the questions based on that year, and we'll prepare the relevant form for you, even if it is just Form 8843.
Same for if someone didn't do for 2023, 2024?
Absolutely. Yeah, again, so just go in, choose 2023, answer the questions based on that year. We'll generate the form and then do the same thing for 2024. So you do need to go in and complete that questionnaire for each of the years that you need to catch up on. But we'll generate the relevant form based on the information that you provide.
Okay. And I know there are a bunch of questions about FICA tax return.
Yep.
There is a slide. We knew that you guys would ask this, so Elvira and I prepared for it. So wait for that thing to come.
Absolutely. We will cover that for sure. Brilliant. So looking at some of the incomes then that will trigger the filing requirement for you. So I've mentioned how if you've received any US income over $0, it will trigger that federal filing requirement, the 1040 NR. So obviously the first and most common is employment income. Maybe you work on campus, you work in the library or the canteen, for example, or maybe you're on OPT or CPT and you're receiving wages or salary. Obviously that's considered income and will trigger a filing requirement. Or maybe you receive a scholarship that covers costs other than tuition or tuition-related expenses. So if your scholarship includes a stipend or covers room and board, or maybe your meals or transport to and from school, anything outside of tuition, and it is considered income and will trigger a filing requirement. Or maybe you receive prizes or awards from your school or university, for example, or you've got investment income, or you've invested in cryptocurrencies. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, some less common types of income, but nevertheless will trigger a filing requirement for you. Maybe you've been to Vegas and you've won on the slot machines, or you've attended a focus group and you've received a gift card in payment for that. Or maybe you have a spare room in your apartment and you've rented that out on Airbnb for over 14 nights. All of this is considered income and will trigger a filing requirement. On the other side, there are some incomes which won't trigger a filing requirement for non-residents. And the first one here is money transferred from parents or relatives overseas. So, you're in the US to study or whatever. If your parents or your relatives send you money from overseas to live on, it's not US source income. And as a non resident, you don't need to report that on your non resident tax return. It's classed as foreign source income. And as a non resident, it doesn't need to be included. Income earned in your home country. So maybe you had a job before you arrived in the US and you bring this money with you, or maybe you have rental income from your home country or investment income, for example. Again, it's not US source income. So the IRS are not concerned with that and it doesn't need to be reported on your non resident tax return. Interest on regular savings accounts then. We've interest on regular savings accounts here, and important to know that for most international students or scholars with a regular, say, Bank of America account, for example, that's going to be tax exempt, and the IRS are not concerned with that. But if you have the likes of a Robinhood investment account that's accrued a lot of interest each year, in that case, the IRS may be concerned with that. And certainly, if you make a gain on that account, there's a high chance that you will receive an income document for that account and you will need to include it on your tax return. But for most standard accounts, you don't need to include it. And finally, then, a scholarship, fellowship grant, a targeted grant, or an achievement award received by a non resident alien for activities conducted outside the United States is treated as foreign source income. So you'll probably notice from my accent that I'm from Ireland. So if, for example, Trinity College in Dublin decide to send me to the US to study for a semester, the scholarship that I receive from Trinity College in Dublin, it's something that I will likely pay tax on back home in Ireland, but it's not something that I need to include in my non-resident US tax return. So you'll see here, income received from outside the US as a non-resident doesn't need to be reported on your tax return. But if you've been in the US long enough to be considered resident for tax purposes, at that point it would change and you would need to report your worldwide income. But while you're considered non resident for tax purposes, it's just your US source income that needs to be reported. So, next we're looking at some of the income documents that you may receive. And the first and most common is the W-2. And the W-2 would outline your wages, your salary, compensation. It'll detail any income that you've earned, any tax that was withheld on that income. Now, also important to note that if you worked for more than one employer, you should receive a W-2 from each one. So for example, if you had 2 different employers in 2025, you'd expect to receive a W-2 from each one. The deadline to receive a W-2 is January 31st of the following year. So January 31st, 2026 for the 2025 tax year. So if you were expecting a W-2, you should have received it at this stage. And if you were expecting one and you haven't received it, then definitely reach out to your employer or your tax withholder and request a copy of that. You will need it when you sit down to prepare your tax return. The second document then is the 1042S document. And that then is pretty much used to report anything that's not reported on the W-2 for a non-resident. So it may be a taxable scholarship. If your scholarship covered anything outside of tuition, then you'd expect to receive a 1042S document. Maybe income exempt by tax treaty, royalty payments, prizes, awards, all of that would be reported on a 1042S document. Now, the deadline to receive a 1042S document is actually March 15th. So if it's a case you're expecting this document and you haven't received it yet, you should receive that by that March 15th deadline. So it is important to wait. If you're expecting that document, please do wait until you've received that before you sit down to prepare your taxes. Then at the bottom, you'll see we've got the little asterisks down below with the form 1099. So these forms, 1099 forms, they're intended for US tax residents only. However, non-residents do frequently receive them. So if you receive a 1099 form, you should absolutely include that when you're going through Sprintax, you're entering details of your income. However your income is reported to you, be it on a W-2, a 1042S, or a 1099 document, it should all be included in step 3 in Sprintax, which I'll show you a little later. Now, important to mention before we move from this slide that not everybody will receive all of these income documents. You'll only receive the ones relevant to you based on the income you've received, if any. So, if there's anyone on this session who hasn't received any income at all, you're just in the US to study, you haven't received any income at all, then you wouldn't expect to receive any of these documents. If you did work on campus, for example, you'd expect to receive a W-2. Or if maybe you received a taxable scholarship or royalty payments or prize or whatever, that would be reported on a 1042-S document. But it's not a case that everyone should receive all of these or even any of these. You'll only receive the ones relevant to you based on the income that you've received, if any.
And some people said they received 1099 NEC, which is, I think, non-employee compensation form.
Hmm.
And someone also 1099G form. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming Sprintax can basically pull all of the information from either of these forms.
Exactly, exactly. So in step 3 on the Sprintax questionnaire, which I'll show you a little later, where you'll upload those income documents, you can choose whatever document you've received, you can upload that document, and we'll pull the information from that, and we'll include that in your tax return and prepare the relevant forms for you.
Yeah. That's someone is asking, Yash is asking, can digital W2 work? Absolutely. That's the best kind because you don't have to take
Absolutely.
photo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it is the best kind because sometimes if you take a picture of a physical document and you upload that, it will work. But sometimes, if it's not perfectly clear, it might not transfer the information exactly. So we'd
Yeah.
always recommend, when you do upload a document, always check to make sure that the information has transferred correctly. And if there's anything that needs to be edited, you can simply click into that box and you can edit that information. So do
Mm.
always check that. That's a great point.
Yeah. And then Nitin is asking, he received 1099 instead of W2. And is that compliant? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Like most common would be the W-2 in that case, but 1099 is absolutely fine and you will be able to upload that in Sprintax.
Yeah. Okay. I think there are a bunch of questions and I don't want to derail the topic, but I'll let you kind of go forward with your flow and then we'll ask the questions.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll have plenty of time at the end anyway, but do feel free to jump in anytime. I'm happy
Yes.
to stop and answer.
Yep.
Perfect. So while we're talking about the income documents, just looking at Form 1098T, and this document is not relevant to you as a non-resident. This document is intended to US residents only, but often all students with a social security number on file with their school will receive one, even non-residents. So it can cause a bit of confusion. So we just wanted to bring that up. This is the biggest form of misfiling every year for non-residents. So it is a tuition statement and it's used to claim an educational tax credit. So let's say you went on to a resident tax preparation provider like TurboTax, for example. They would ask for details from Form 1098T because that is relevant to residents for tax purposes and they prepare resident tax returns. When you're going through Sprintax, we will not ask for information from this form because it's not relevant to tax non-residents. So if you're non-resident for tax purposes and you receive this document, just put it away somewhere safe for your own records. You won't need it when it comes to filing your non-resident tax return. If you are being asked for this form and you're non-resident, then you're in the wrong place. You're probably on a resident tax preparation provider when you should be using a non-resident provider. So just to be careful of that, 1098T is only applicable to residents for tax purposes. As a non-resident, it doesn't apply to you. Now, if you've been in the US long enough to be considered resident for tax purposes and you need to submit a resident return, in that case, if you've received this form, you can use it on your resident return. So next we're looking at non-resident spouse and dependents. And we often get questions about your spouse and dependents and whether they need to file or, if they do need to do anything when it comes to taxes. And the IRS, they are pretty strict on how your spouse and dependents should be treated. So they basically have the same rules as you, the primary visa holder. So if they were present in the US for any time during the tax year and didn't receive any income, they still need to complete Form 8843, the same as yourselves. But if they did receive any income, any US income over $0, then they will trigger the federal filing requirement, and they could also trigger a state filing requirement depending on their situation. Also important to be aware that non-residents can't file a joint return with their spouse. They must be filed separately. However, if you're a non-resident and you're married to a resident, You could elect to file jointly on your spouse's resident tax return, but we would recommend that you do the math on both options to see which option is more beneficial to your tax position. So next we're looking at FICA taxes, and I know there have been some questions come through on this. So I suppose firstly, what is FICA? Well, I suppose if you're in the US at the age of 65 and you need assistance with your medical bills, FICA tax would assist with that. But the thinking is, as a non-resident student or scholar, the chances are you're probably not going to be in the US at the age of 65 to benefit from that. So for that reason, there's a general rule that if you're on an F1 or a J1 visa and you're non-resident, you're exempt from paying FICA taxes. And, in most cases, your school obviously is aware of your tax position. If you're working on campus, chances are they're not deducting FICA taxes from you. But if you're on OPT or you're working for somebody outside of the school, they may not be aware of your tax position and they may treat you the same as they would a resident who does pay FICA taxes. So what we'd say here is check your W-2. There will be a section on there that will say FICA or Social Security or Medicare. And if tax has been withheld, and if you're on an F1 or a J1 visa and you're non-resident, then you can definitely claim that back. Now, the first thing to do would be to ask your employer for a refund. That's the quickest way to get your refund through. But, they're not always willing to do that. They'd have to resubmit returns and so on. It can be a bit of work on their side. They may not want to do that. If they don't, then you can definitely apply for your FICA refund with the IRS via Form 843 and 8316, because you will get all of that back. Now, this is something Sprintax can assist with, so if you do need help with a FICA application, we can certainly prepare that application for you. Now, also just to be aware that H1B, J2 and TN visa holders are subject to FICA taxes from their first day of employment. So it's just the F1 and the J1 primary visa holder as long as you're considered non-resident for tax purposes. Now, this slide just gives a quick comparison of the impact that FICA taxes can have on your wages if it's been withheld incorrectly. So you'll see here, for example, the F1 student earning $20,000 could have $1,530 of FICA withheld, whereas the J1 research scholar earning $20,000 could have $3,825 of FICA withheld, and that is the student portion only. So it just goes to show the impact it can have and how important it is to ensure that your employer is aware of your tax position and when you should or shouldn't be paying FICA taxes. It'll save you then having to go and claim those refunds back afterwards. FICA tax refunds can take some time to come through, so it's always good to ensure that your employer is aware of your situation from the beginning. So I've mentioned up to this point that how everyone on this session today needs to do something when it comes to taxes, minimum being Form 8843, and if you have received any US income over $0, it will trigger the federal filing requirement, the 1040 NR. Well, you may also trigger a state filing requirement, and state tax rules differ from state to state, where some states will say that you need to file if you earn over $8,000, for example. Some will say $17,000. Some will say you need to file from the very first dollar. And of course, we know there are some states where there's no state tax. But it can also depend on things like your visa type, the number of days you've spent in the state, and even down to the type of accommodation you've lived in. So it can be quite complicated. But again, the good news here is that you don't need to worry about that. Sprintax will work it out for you. So once you provide the information required in the questionnaire, which I'll show you shortly, we will work everything out for you. We'll determine whether you've triggered a state filing requirement, and we'll prepare the relevant documents for you. So next up we have ITIN, and I know this can definitely be a bit of a trouble area for you as international students and scholars, but I'm sure also for your schools as well. But for anyone that may be unfamiliar, ITIN stands for Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. And it's generally required by somebody who has received taxable income and needs to file a federal tax return, but they're not eligible for a social security number. So it can be pretty common and most common among scholarship recipients, such as athletes, for example. Now, in terms of the application process, the application form is the W-7, and it can be applied for in advance of filing the federal tax return or alongside the federal tax return. But the process does change depending on which route you're going to go down. So in terms of applying for an ITIN in advance of filing the federal tax return, a responsible officer at your school can certify copies of the required documents. But where the process changes then is if you're applying for an ITIN alongside your tax return. At that stage, the responsible officer at your school can no longer certify the documents. Your documents would need to be certified by a CAA, a certified acceptance agent, or at a local IRS office. Or if you're back home in your home country when you're applying for an ITIN, you'd need to go to the governmental department that issued your identification document or to a US embassy or consulate. But important to mention here, not everybody will need an ITIN. If you didn't receive any income at all and you only need to submit Form 8843, you don't need to have a US tax identification number at all. If you have a social security number, you don't need to have an ITIN. So it's only if you've triggered a filing requirement and you don't have that social security number, in that case, you'd need an ITIN. So it's not everyone that'll need it, but if you do, it's certainly something that Sprintax can assist with again. So next we're looking at the implications of misfiling. So what happens if I don't file or if I filed incorrectly in the past? So I'm sure there's some of you sitting on this session today thinking, okay, well, I've been in the US for a couple of years and I didn't realize until now that I needed to do something. Or maybe I filed last year, I used TurboTax, maybe I entered information from that form 1098T that I mentioned earlier. So in that case, you filed incorrectly, and now what you need to do is to correct that. So for anyone that needs to catch up on a previous year, and I know we touched on this already, but it's a case of just logging in, selecting the year that you need to catch up on, answer the questions based on that year, and we'll generate the relevant forms for you. You can do that online on Sprintax for the last 3 years. And if you need to go back further than that, we can do that offline for you. Now, if it's a case you're due a tax refund, the IRS are happy to issue that to you for those last 3 years. But if it's further back than that, let's say you're due a refund from 4 years ago, unfortunately, they're not going to pay that. They'll only pay a refund for the last 3 years. But if it's the other way around, if it's a case you owe them money, there's no 3-year cutoff point. They will expect you to go back as far as necessary if it's a case that you owe them. For anyone then that may have misfiled, maybe used TurboTax or another tax preparation, resident tax preparation provider in the past, and you are actually non-resident, what you need to do now is to prepare an amended tax return, which is the 1040X, along with a correct non-resident tax return. So that'll set the record straight for you. So really important, if you do need to catch up or if you need to correct a year that you've already filed, we would highly recommend that you do so. And Sprintax can assist with both if you need help with them. But what are the actual implications then of not filing or misfiling? And the one we've highlighted here, well, I suppose the first one, let's have a look at the first one. Non-residents are required to comply with all US laws, including IRS and filing tax forms, even if it is just Form 8843. So it's part of your visa conditions. It's something that you do need to do to remain compliant. But the one that we have highlighted here, and the one we'll always continue to emphasize, is the impact that it could have on your future immigration status. So there may be some of you on today's session who would like to stay in the US, maybe apply for a change of status in future. And it is likely that you could be sitting in your visa interview and they could look for evidence of tax compliance for previous stays. So with that said, it is so important that your tax record is correct and up to date for every year that you've been in the US, even if it is just Form 8843. Also, if you owe tax to the IRS and you're late filing, they can apply fees and penalties and interest can accrue on that. But finally, you might actually be due a refund, and this is the only way you can claim your refund is through submitting your tax return. So most importantly, it's part of your visa conditions. It's something you do need to do. It could affect your future immigration status, but you might also be missing out on a refund. So just one last slide before we look into using Sprintax and what that looks like. Just one quick slide about being careful about the options being recommended to you. So, you may have a friend or colleague who has told you, well, I used TurboTax in the past and I got a nice refund. I got the educational tax credit, I got a refund of that and so on. And you think, great, I'll do the same. And that's absolutely fine if you are resident for tax purposes. but TurboTax do not prepare non-resident tax returns. We've taken a snippet from the TurboTax help page here where they're asked, does TurboTax handle Form 1040-NR for non-resident aliens? And they say that although they don't handle that form, they've partnered with Sprintax to provide that service. So they're telling you there themselves that they don't prepare non-resident tax returns. However, if you were to go to their website and you enter their information, they will prepare the 1040 for you, which is the resident tax return, the resident federal tax return. So if you're non-resident, you need to ensure that you are submitting a correct non-resident tax return. And the same if you're resident, you need to ensure that you're submitting a correct resident tax return. So it is important to be aware of your tax situation and that you're submitting a correct return. And like I said earlier, if you're unsure, if you're not sure whether you're resident or non-resident, just go in and complete step 1 in Sprintax and we will work that out for you. So let's have a look at what that looks like then when you're sitting down to prepare your tax return. So here's the code that UD will have shared with you. I think UD will probably have that on your social platforms and so on, but there's the code. So it's taxprep.sprintax.com/UD. But this will bring you to the Sprintax login page where you can register your Sprintax account. Now, if you've used Sprintax in the past, you can simply log in on the top right-hand corner, or if it's your first time, you just click Get Started and we'll guide you through setting up your account. So we're going to ask for your name, your email address, you create a password, that kind of information, and you're straight in then into the questionnaire. Now, this is what I was talking about when I mentioned step 1, and we'll determine your residency status. So in here, we're going to ask you for the details we need to determine if you're resident or non-resident for tax. At this point, when you've entered that information, if we determine that you've been in the US long enough to be considered resident for tax purposes, we'll stop you here and we'll let you know. So we'll give you a pop-up message that says, hey, looks like you're resident for tax purposes. You need to use a resident provider like TurboTax. But if you're non-resident, you will then proceed on through the next steps. Now you'll see in the progress bar here on the left-hand side, you'll see exactly where you are. So at this point, you've gone through residency, you've gone through getting to know you, where we'll have asked, have you received any income in the US? What type of income have you received, and so on. And if you've said yes in step 2 that you did receive income in the US, then obviously we're going to bring you into step 3, which is Let's Talk Money. If you say no, that you haven't received any income in the US in step 2, then you'll skip the Let's Talk Money and the Offset Your Expenses section, and you'll go straight to the About Your School section, and we'll prepare the relevant form for you. So the questionnaire is dynamic in that way. The questions it'll ask will be based off the answers you've given previously. So this is step 3, the income details section, and this is where you're going to enter the details from those income documents that you may have received, the W-2, the 1042S, the 1099, you can upload those documents here using our OCR technology. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a digital copy is brilliant. That should transfer perfectly for you. If you take a picture of a physical document and upload it, always check to make sure that the information has transferred correctly. And if there's anything that needs to be edited, just click in, edit that information, and proceed on then through the next steps. Now, you'll also see on this page and on every page as you go through the Sprintax questionnaire, you've got 2 support options. So the green chat bubble, that is the 24/7 live chat. So any questions you've got anytime, day or night, as you go through this questionnaire, we've got live chat agents available, ready and waiting to assist. The other option then is the knowledge base. So you'll find, how-to videos on each step of the questionnaire and other useful resources in there. So there's tons of options for you available in terms of support. So if you do have any questions as you go through, please don't hesitate to use those support options. Now, once you reach the state tax section, here we need to know about the different states you've lived in and worked in during the tax year. Now, in step 1, residency, we're asking you about all of your visits in and out of the US since you first started coming. But when you get to the state tax section, we're only interested in the states you've lived in during the tax year that you're filing for. So 2025 in this case. You don't need to go back to your previous history of visits in and out of the state. It's just for that tax year. But we're going to ask you things like, the entry date, the exit date, the state you've lived in, the type of accommodation, the type of visit, and so on. And we'll determine then if you've triggered a state filing requirement. Now, in the second screenshot here, and I know it's probably a little small, it might be hard to see, but in this instance, this person has triggered a New York state filing requirement. Now, you'll see it's a tick box scenario. So if you decide, okay, well, I want to prepare my federal return with Sprintax, maybe I have another way to prepare my state. That's fine. You don't have to do it with Sprintax. You can untick that, and we'll just generate the federal forms for you. But if you leave that ticked, we will prepare the state form for you as well. Also important to note that if you do trigger a state filing requirement, if you choose not to do that with Sprintax and you uncheck that, please do make sure that you do submit it another way. If you have triggered the state filing requirement, it is every bit as important that you submit that as it is on the federal side. So once you've gone through the steps, and you'll see on the left-hand side the progress bar here, you've gone through the different steps. At this point, before you even reach this page, we'll have already told you if there's a refund there, if it's a tax liability, or if your taxes have balanced. If it's a case you're due a refund, we'll give you the options on how to receive that refund. If you owe tax to the IRS, we'll give you the options on how to make that payment and so on. But here then is the breakdown of what has been required. So in this case, we've got the federal and we have the New York state filing requirement. Here is where you're going to enter that code that UD has provided. So you just put that code into the white access code box, click validate, and that will save you $5 on that federal fee. You then pay the balance yourself, and for any additional services like state, FICA, ITIN, anything else you add along the way. So do make sure to use that code UD at checkout to save the $5. Also, just to mention that e-filing is available for federal returns for non-residents if you meet the IRS criteria. So if you do meet the IRS criteria, Sprintax will recognize that and will provide the blue proceed to e-file option. If you don't see that, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It just means you didn't meet the IRS criteria to e-file. Now, we do have some detailed blog post, including the IRS limitations there. So if you go to the Sprintax webpage, just go to the resources tab at the top and go to the blog. You'll be able to find that. Just type in e-filing and you'll get that full blog post. But things like if you didn't have a social security number, you just have an ITIN, or if any of your income documents is missing an EIN, an employer's identification number, or if, for example, your 1042S document is missing a unique code identifier. Things like that would stop you from e-filing. So if you do qualify to e-file, we'll give you that option. If not, you just need to download your tax pack and follow the instructions that we provide. Now, this is what your tax pack looks like. So we're going to give you a cover letter outlining what your next steps are, and we're also going to give you all of your tax documents, whatever it is you've triggered, be it the 1040NR, the Form 8843, state tax returns as well if needed. We will have them all there for you and everything will be pre-filled. So all you need to do is print it, read the instructions we provided here, sign the document and mail it to the address that we provide you with. So we'll tell you, okay, you need to print this document, you need to sign it on whatever page, you need to mail it to this address and we'll give you the address to send it to, along with a copy of whatever supporting documents are needed. So maybe it's a W-2 or a 1042S, for example. So I can't stress how important it is. When you get to this stage, don't stop and kind of think, okay, well, I've generated the forms, everything's done, I don't need to do any more. You do need to print the document, you need to follow these instructions and mail those documents to the IRS and the State Department if needed. Unless, of course, you've qualified to e-file, in which case we'll have told you that, you'll know exactly what your situation is. But also just to be aware that if you only need to submit Form 8843, that can't be e-filed on its own. That will always need to be physically mailed. And if you've triggered a state filing requirement, that will always need to be mailed as well. That can't be e-filed. So it's only the federal return could be e-filed if you meet the IRS criteria. So lastly then, before we look into the questions then and spend some time on those, just some of the other options or support options, I should say, that are available to you this tax season. So you've got educational tax videos on YouTube and blog content for tax awareness. So, all of your frequently asked questions, tax season hot topics, important updates. There'll always be a nice short video on the YouTube channel or a more detailed blog post on that Sprintax blog. So, two great resources for you. I'd be very surprised if you didn't get the answer to any question you've got in either of those. You have the 24/7 live chat available throughout tax season. So, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, day or night, you will always have that live chat support available throughout tax season. Sprintax Forms, then, it's another software that Sprintax have, not relevant to everybody, but if you're somebody maybe that's about to start a new employment, maybe start an OPT, and you want to ensure that you are taxed correctly from the beginning, to ensure that the correct amount of federal tax is withheld, that you're getting any tax treaty benefits you're entitled to, and so on, Sprintax Forms would assist with that. And of course, tax workshops and webinars, of which this is one, especially for you guys that Judy has organized. So, delighted to have you all here. And it's the perfect opportunity for you to ask any questions you have. We do have a series of free webinars throughout tax season where they're open to non-residents across the US, and we'll have hundreds and thousands on those webinars at any one time. So as you can imagine, there's hundreds of questions coming through. So hopefully we'll get through as many of your questions as possible here today.
All right. Thank you, Elvira. I truly love listening to you. And every single time I'm like, oh, that's a new insight. And as people were asking questions like, oh, I think we should add this in the next slides. So we have more than, 100 plus questions. So I'm going to try to pick the common grouped questions. And then I know I told Elvira that, hey, is it possible to stay a little over time? Because I know we will have a lot of questions. We're going to try to cover as many as possible. And like Elvira mentioned, that if you use the 24/7 chat, I have personally used it, and it'll answer your question on the form that you are on or on the step that you are in, and it'll also tell you like what you need to do, etc. But thank you again, Elvira. I will keep your screen here, but I'll like pick the question, and then if we need to go back to screen, we can always bring it up.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. All right. So I am gonna go to the most common question. Actually, one of the questions we received is health insurance forms that people receive. Maybe they are on OPT or H1B. 1095, I think Massachusetts have 1099 form. What do we do with this? Is this required?
Perfect. Yeah. And I mean, as a non-resident, unfortunately, there's very little in terms of expenses or deductions that can be claimed. But Form 1095A is something that can be claimed. So if you have received 1095A, that can be included on your tax return. So what will happen is, as you're going through Sprintax, we will ask, have you received Form 1095A? You'd say yes to that, and you'll proceed through the end. You'll fill in the rest of the information. We'll ask you then to email us a copy of that 1095A outside of the platform, and we'll then update your return offline, and we'll let you know when that's been finalized. It'll take a little longer, rather than it being ready instantly for you, you may have to wait 24 hours, we'll say. We'll email you then to let you know when that tax return is ready, and you can log into your account then to access that. 1095B and C, they're not something that are relevant, not something that you need to include. But I mean, in terms of any of those 1099 forms and so on, you will be able to upload those within step 3 in the software.
Yeah. So Nidhi, in your case, because you do have 1095A, you may be eligible for some refund. So yeah, definitely take advantage of that.
Exactly. Do let us know that you have that. We'll review it then, and we'll make sure that, if there is a refund based on that you're getting that back.
Yeah. Can I only file state tax in Sprintax? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, absolutely. There is the option there. Now, you will have to upload details from your previously filed federal return in order to generate the state, but it is absolutely an option within Sprintax.
Yep. Okay. Someone says, I'm yet to receive my SSN. So should I wait until I get my SSN and then start filing my tax?
Okay, so it depends on your situation. If you worked during 2025 and you've triggered a filing requirement, you are entitled to a Social Security number. So I'm assuming you probably have worked and that's why you're getting a Social Security number. But if you didn't receive any income in 2025 tax year, maybe you only received income, say January of this year, then you'll only need to submit Form 8843. And in that case, you don't need to have a Social Security number or an ITIN. So I suppose if it's a case you did receive income during that tax year and you've applied for your Social Security number, you will need to wait for that to come true.
Yep. Okay, this is another group of common question. I am an F1 visa student. I completed unpaid CPT in 2025, was completely unpaid, and some of people have asked I was unpaid intern as well. Since there was no income, I'm assuming there will be no mention or form. Will I still have to file anything in this case?
That's a great question. So, yeah, I suppose the fact that you haven't received any income for that, in step two, when we ask you, have you received any US source income? You're going to say no to that. Yeah, fair enough, you did CPT, but you didn't get paid for it. So you're saying no to that question. You're going to skip past the income details and the expenses section, and you'll go straight to the next step. So, in that case, we will generate Form 8843 for you. That's if you didn't have any other income outside of that. If you've no income whatsoever, then it's just Form 8843. But if you did receive any US income, it will be the 1040 NR. But once you provide the information in that questionnaire, we will determine exactly what forms needed and prepare the relevant ones for you.
Yeah. Same for this. I worked only at an unpaid position, no income, any additional forms to submit. So as Elvira mentioned, step two, you answer that question, and I think is it Elvira 8843 form?
Yes, exactly. That's the minimum filing requirement for all non-residents in the US. So even if you didn't receive income, you're on the F1 visa, you will definitely need to submit Form 8843. But we'll prepare that for you.
Right. And so just to go elaborate on this, so even nobody who received income, they will still go through this step. They will say, I did not receive any income. Sprintax will generate Form 8843, or it'll generate that document at the
Yeah.
end, but it's not e-filed. So you will have to print out and then mail it to IRS. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. So if it's just Form 8843, it'll always need to be mailed. If you've triggered the filing requirement, the 1040 NR, in that case, Form 8843 is provided with that. And if you have met the IRS criteria to e-file your federal return, in that case, Form 8843 will e-file with it. But if it's on its own, if you haven't received any income and it's just Form 8843, you will always need to mail that.
Yeah. Okay. I had a remote volunteer opportunity with my university for my OPT, but stayed in a different state with family. Do I need to file any state tax? I didn't earn any income, or just file Form 883, 8843?
Okay, so I suppose a volunteer opportunity, you didn't receive any income, it will just be Form 8843. And in that case, you're not going to trigger a state filing requirement. It's only if you've triggered a federal that you may trigger the state. So yeah, it'll just be Form 8843 in your case.
Yep. Okay. I moved to Massachusetts from Texas. I'm on F1 OPT, recently graduated in Texas. I filed using Sprintax last year when I was in university. And how to and which would be the best method to file tax? I think you can continue to use Sprintax.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're still considered non-resident for tax purposes, and we'll work that out in step one. So as long as you're considered non-resident for tax purposes, you can use Sprintax. If you've been in the US long enough to be considered resident, we'll stop you there and we'll let you know and we'll point you in the right direction.
Yep. Okay, my employer missed paying tax to Social Security. Will there be any chance to correct it now?
I suppose for 2025, it's probably too late to correct that, but what'll happen is it'll be corrected through your tax return. So if it's a case you haven't had tax withheld and it should have been withheld, chances are you probably will end up owing tax to the IRS or maybe the State Department, depending on your situation. So it will be corrected through your tax return. But what I would say is, chat with your employer, make sure they're aware of your situation for 2026. So, so that they're deducting tax correctly or not deducting tax correctly, whatever the situation may be. But make sure they're aware of your situation for 2026. But for 2025, now looking back, it'll be fixed through your tax return.
Yeah. Okay. If I've completed an internship which had tax assisted relocation benefits, they have included the relocation income in W 2 with some federal withholding. Are there any other things to consider before filing tax except adding W 2?
No, just upload that W-2 document. We'll pull the information from that, and based on the information that you provide through that questionnaire, along with that W-2 information, we'll generate the relevant forms for you.
Yeah. What if a student receives like a Chase student checking bonus? Does that count as a reportable income?
Generally not. If you receive an income document from the bank, then do upload it in Sprintax. But, generally, if you're receiving under a certain amount, you probably won't receive that at all. But if you do receive an income document, upload it in step 3. We'll work it out for you then to determine if it's something that needs to be included or not.
Yep. I've received a CPA exam award, $1,000 in August 2025 as my CPA resources reimbursement. So is this in my income for 2025?
Have you received any income document for that? I mean, if you've received a W-2 or a 1099 or whatever, maybe a W or a 1042S, do upload that in step 3, and we'll take that into account. Income maybe that's not reported on any income document, you can always add that in the other income section in step 3, and we'll analyze it then. We'll see if it's something that needs to be included in that tax return.
Yep. Okay. I have a student loan from a foreign country. Can I still claim the student loan interest deduction on my US taxes?
Most likely not, unfortunately. There's very little in terms of deductions that can be claimed as a non-resident, but we will ask for everything that can be included as you go through that questionnaire. So, the best thing is to go through that and enter any information that's relevant to you based on what we're asking, and we'll work it all out for you.
Yeah. But I think, Elvira, correct me, if someone has a student loan from United States, they should be able to claim the interest.
I think there may be something that can be claimed there, but again, once you go through and you fill in the information, the software will work all of that out for you.
Yeah. Okay. I've already filed an incorrect 1040 for this year. How do I file amendment return using Sprintax?
Okay, perfect. So for this year, for 2025 filing, the amended tax return is not available yet for this year. That will be a bit later. I wouldn't worry too much right now. You will be able to do that a little further down the line. Now, if it's a case you filed an incorrect tax return for any previous year, you can do that right now. But for 2025, the IRS haven't released that yet. The amended tax returns, they won't accept an amended tax return as of yet. So keep an eye, follow follow Sprintax on social media, follow the YouTube channel, the Instagram, we'll keep you updated as to when you'll be able to submit an amended tax return for the current filing period.
Yep. Okay. Do I need to pay capital gain tax on profit I booked on stock as someone on OPT?
Yeah, possibly so. Like, you'll likely have received an income document for that, and you will need to include that on your tax return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is an interesting one. I'm on F1 OPT, didn't receive a 1099 from my employer. I'm an independent contractor. He said no 1099 is required because he paid me by credit card through PayPal. PayPal also didn't send me any tax form. I just received the payments there. How should I report this income on my taxes?
That's a good question. And I mean, really, they should be providing you with some income document. No matter how they make that payment to you, they should be reporting that. It's part of their obligations. But I suppose if you really can't get an income document from them, I would be asking them again. I'd be saying, look, I need an income document. I need to report my taxes. I need an income document from you. If you can't get that, you can include it under other income in that step 3 on Sprintax. You can use the information from your PayPal account. You'll be able to upload copies of the transactions coming through there or whatever, and we can help you in that sense. But I would be reaching out and requesting an income document from them. They should be providing something.
Mm, Yep. Didn't work on my day one CPT college last year at anywhere. Do I still need to file? I was on J1 visa before completely um, file the tax for that year, but no income on 2025, same as the other person. So I think
Okay.
it's, yep,
Yeah, so if you didn't receive any income, if you were present at all in the US during 2025, even if you didn't receive income, you need to submit Form 8843.
yep. I paid FICA unknowingly, but now got refund has been processed with the help of my HR, and also got the new W2C form, which is the corrected form. Now, which one has to be filed for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you upload your W2C form in step 3 in Sprintax, we'll see then, that you've received a refund of that FICA or whatever, and that doesn't need to be like we give you the option. If we see that there's that there's FICA tax withheld on your W2, we'll ask you, have you applied for this refund or do you need assistance applying for this refund? So if you upload your W2C, we'll see that you've got that. So W2C in that case.
Yeah. Okay. I moved from one state to another during the tax year. Should I be filing for both taxes? Also, Massachusetts have health insurance tax form as well. What will be the process for this?
Yeah. So in terms of the process, is just go through the questionnaire, provide the information that we ask you for throughout. In terms of, will you trigger more than one state filing requirement? It's possible. It's impossible to answer it on a session like this without knowing a bit more about your circumstances and the length of time you've spent and the type of accommodation you've lived in and so on. So, the best thing to do there is fill in your details in that state tax section and we will work that out for you. If you have triggered more than one state filing requirement, we will prepare the documents for each state. We'll prepare everything for you.
Yeah. And I think there is another common pattern I see, that I did not know that I was not supposed to, get like pay for FICA taxes.
Mhm.
Uh, and my HR is denying to return that FICA tax. How do I get it back?
Absolutely. And that's something we see so much of. As I said earlier, a lot of time the employer doesn't want to do it because they need to go back and amend tax returns on their side and so on. And it's a bit of work. So, if it's a case you can't get it back through your employer, you can apply directly with the IRS via Form 843 and 8316. Those are the forms that you'll use to claim a FICA refund. But again, it is something that Sprintax can help with. So when you upload your income document, if we see that there's FICA tax withheld there, we're going to ask you, have you applied for this refund or have you received this refund? If you say no to that, we'll ask you, do you want us to prepare the FICA application for you? So we will prepare the relevant forms and you can then submit them to the IRS.
Mm,
Now, it does take some time for the FICA refunds to come through. You could be waiting months on that to come through, but you can definitely apply for it and you will be entitled to claim it back if you're on an F1 or a J1 visa and you're non-resident.
mm. And is there a way that of FICA after filing 843 and 8316?
I suppose in terms of a federal tax return or refund, you can visit irs.gov/refunds and you can check the status of your federal tax refund there. But in terms of FICA, I don't think there's a way to track that online. You'd need to actually just reach out to them directly. But like I said, it does take time. It can take 6 months or more for a FICA refund to come through. So do expect that you will be waiting a while for that.
Mhm. I worked as a student worker until May 2025. After that, I graduated and started working on OPT as an unpaid intern. What do I need to do regarding taxes? I haven't received W2 or any other. Hmm.
Okay, so if you worked until May 2025, you don't say where you worked, if it was on campus or what, but either way, wherever you worked up until May 2025, you should definitely receive a W-2 for that. So I
Ah,
would definitely reach out to whoever it was you worked for during that period and request that W-2. After that, you graduated and you did OPT, but it was unpaid. So, for that part of it, there's nothing that you need to include there. But you should definitely have gotten a W-2 for that period up until May 2025. And that should outline the total income that you've received from that employer in 2025. So do reach out and request that.
yeah. So they need to reach out to whoever they were working for. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I work on campus. I only receive W2, not 1042S. Do I need 1042S as well?
No, not necessarily. Unless you received income that's reported on that 1042S document, then you wouldn't receive it. So if you worked on campus and that was your only source of income, chances are W2 is probably all you'd expect to receive. If you were due, I suppose what might trigger a 1042S document if you were due it would be if you had a scholarship that covered costs outside of tuition. If you had a stipend or your scholarship covered room and board, that would be reported on a 1042S. Or if you had received prizes or awards, for example, or if some of your income is exempt under tax treaty, you might receive a 1042S there. But in your case, it is likely that Form W2 is all you're expecting to receive. But if you're not 100% sure, reach out to your school just to confirm if they are due to issue you a 1042S document, and they'll be able to confirm.
Yep. A person who is on H1B and married can't file joint tax return? Question mark.
If you're considered non-resident for tax purposes, you should be filing separately on H1B or any, as long as you're considered non-resident, it needs to be filed separately. Unless you are married to a resident for tax purposes, in that case, you could elect to file jointly on their resident return. But like when I mentioned earlier that we recommend to do the math on both options first, what I mean there is you could go in and fill in your details on Sprintax as an individual yourself, see what the outcome is there before you finalize the return. And then you could do the same on the resident side, maybe use TurboTax or another resident tax preparation provider, entering details for you and your resident spouse and see what the situation is there, and then decide which one works out better for you and go with that.
Okay. Entered US in 2023 on F1 and stayed 2 days. Transferred SEVIS to another college within a week. No income for Form 8843. Should I list the original school or transferred school?
Okay, so list the original or the transferred school. I suppose the school you've transferred to, I don't think it makes a huge difference there. It's really based on the number of days you've spent in the US, the visa you're on, and so on. So the fact that you're on an F1 visa and you spent 2 days in the US in 2023, you should be filing the Form 8843 for that year. Now, as you go through the questionnaire, if you are unsure about anything, use that live chat, because when you use that live chat, they'll have your email address. They'll be able to see where you are on that form, and they'll be able to assist you with any questions that you've got. Now, in
Yep.
terms of that live chat as well, just to mention that there is a chat bot that will attempt to answer your question firstly. If that's unsuccessful, it'll transfer you through to a real person, a live agent. So, if it's a case that you want to go straight through, just type in the word agent or real person or, live agent, whatever, it'll skip you past that bot.
Nice. Okay. I got W2 form for 2025. I worked on F1 CPT and OPT. I got a tax cut in every paycheck, federal and state tax. Will I owe or will I get refunded?
Yeah,
Kathy, that is the question everyone has.
yeah, and something that's impossible to answer here without seeing, your situation in particular. But I mean, it's not a case that everyone's due a refund automatically. It depends on how you've been taxed throughout the year. So if you've had the correct amount of tax withheld, then you won't be due any refund. Your taxes should balance. If you have overpaid in tax, so if your employer was deducting too much tax, then you would actually be due a refund in that case. If it's a case that they weren't deducting enough tax, then it could be that you will owe tax. So we'll work that out. When you fill in your details in the Sprintax questionnaire, we'll do the calculations and we'll work all of that out for you.
Yeah. And Kathy, and I think everyone who's here, I think you fill out the form W4 when you join a new company. That's when you are telling them how much tax to withhold. And based on that, they will withhold that much tax from you. And at the end of the year, which Elvira kind of mentioned, if they have withheld way too much, then you'll get a refund. If not, then government will ask from you, or you may just owe nothing or get nothing.
hmm And just on that, actually, before we move on from that, Judy, those forms you mentioned, the W4, Sprintax forms that I mentioned there in the other support piece, for anyone that wants to ensure they're taxed correctly from the beginning, that's what Sprintax forms will do for you. It'll prepare the W-4 so that,
Mm,
you're being deducted the right amount of federal taxes. It can prepare the W-8 Ben, the 8233 to ensure that you're getting any tax treaty benefits that you're entitled to and so on. So, if you do need help with that, making sure that you are taxed correctly and you're starting a new OPT, for example, then use that Sprintax forms, if you need assistance with those pre-employment forms.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. It is my first time filing taxes as F1 student working on campus. Could you please explain the process to follow in order to file taxes? I wish
Okay.
we just went through the whole thing, but maybe, Elvira, if you can do a quick
Yeah.
1 minute summary.
Absolutely. So firstly, you just need to make sure that you've got your income documents. So you worked on campus, you'll probably receive a W-2. You should have that at this stage. So once you have all of your income documents or any income documents that you're expecting, probably just the W-2 in your case, go into Sprintax, create your account or log in, go through that questionnaire. In step 3, upload that W-2 and we'll pull that information from there. But the main thing is to go through each step, providing the information that we're asking you for. We'll then do the calculations, we'll generate the relevant forms for you. We'll let you know if you've qualified to e-file your federal return. If not, we'll give you the tax pack that you need to print, follow those instructions in the cover letter, and mail those documents then to the IRS or the State Department. So just fill in the information, follow the instructions we provide, and that's it. You've done everything you need to do.
Mhm. Yep. There are a bunch of questions. Is interest from high yield savings account, that is Robinhood or Wealthfront, taxable for non-resident aliens?
So it's definitely something that's reportable. Whether it's taxable depends on your situation, but we will work that out for you. So do definitely upload the income document in step 3 and we'll work that out.
Right. Because I think most people will end up receiving 1099 INT form, which is the interest that you receive because of 4% or 5% of how much amount you have. But
Mm,
then will you owe or get refund? That depends on your entire tax situation. Is that correct?
exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I just joined the live. If my question is already answered, my employer has unknowingly withheld my FICA taxes for 2025. I reached out to them if they can return the 2025 and Jan 2026 taxes, but cannot refund 2025 taxes. And they mentioned instead they will remove the FICA taxable wages for that year and issue a corrected form WC for 2025. Okay.
Okay. So if they're issuing that W-2C form for 2025, it sounds like they are going to issue that refund for 2025 as well. So once you get that W-2C, upload that into Sprintax as you're going through the 2025 process, and we'll take that into account for you. But it sounds like the employer is going to issue that refund for you. And the fact that you've reached out now as well, they're aware of your situation. They'll correct that for 2026, and going forward, then they shouldn't be deducting FICA taxes from you.
Yeah. So, Preeti, you don't have to file those forms because you are getting refund from your employer.
Exactly. Just upload that W-2C in step 3 and we'll work the rest out for you.
Yep. Okay. My university is in Texas, but I moved to Washington for internship. Both states do not have state tax or state income tax. Is there a need to consider anything else? I suppose it will be only federal tax that I need to file.
Yeah, exactly. It'll likely just be the federal taxes, So again, it's just a case of going through that questionnaire and we'll prepare the relevant forms for you. But yeah, because both states don't have state tax, you won't have a state filing requirement.
That is so lucky of you.
Absolutely.
I received fellowship of X dollars amount for doing an unpaid employment from my university. Do I need to file this as well? If yes, they haven't provided me any form yet. Which form do I need to ask for?
So yeah, I definitely reach out to them. It's likely that they will issue a 1042S document, so definitely reach out. They'll be able to confirm exactly which document. But, the fact that you've received a fellowship, it is something that needs to be reported on your tax return. So do reach out and ask them for that document.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Can I claim no tax on car loan interest? I'm on STEM OPT year in USA for 2.5 years.
Unfortunately not. No, there's very little in terms of expenses that can be claimed as a non-resident, and tax on a car loan is not one of them.
Hmm. Yep. F1 students are non-resident for tax purposes, right? Or substantial presence test also applies to F1 student.
That's a great question. So as an F1 student, you are considered non-resident for your first 5 calendar years in the US. But after you've been in the US for 5 calendar years, that's when the substantial presence test is used. So let's say you're into your 6th calendar year. The IRS will then use the substantial presence test. So it'll look back then at the previous 3 years, and it'll take all of your days of presence in 2025, we'll say, 1/3 of your days of presence in the year before that, and 1/6 of your days of presence in the year before that. And if that totals to 183 days, you would be considered resident. So let's say in year 6, you are, studying in the US, you've spent the whole academic year in the US, you are going to have spent more than 183 days in the US in that year alone. So straight away, you would be considered resident in year 6 in that case. But again,
Hmm.
once you go in and complete step 1, we'll work that out for you.
Nice. Okay, I had relocation amount provided, but have not received any docs. Employer told it's not required to file tax, just informational. Do I need while filing taxes? W2 doesn't have any relocation amount included.
No, that's fine then. You're absolutely fine then not to include that.
Yeah. Okay, my account at Sprintax was with university. Currently, I don't have access to that since I graduated in 2024. How can I access that as I had previously filed tax returns?
Okay. So you can still actually log into your account using that university email. You don't need to have access to your university account to get into it. You can log in using your university email and password. If it's a case well, no, you know what your university email is, so you can log in using that same information. The information then will transfer to the new tax year for your previously entered personal information, visit history, and so on. Then you just need to update your new visit history if you have any, and your income details, and so on. Now, if you did want to create an account using a personal email, you can absolutely do that, but the information won't transfer over from your previously, generated account with your university email.
Mm. Okay. Just to clarify, it should I file the original W2 that was sent to me first and then WC in the other income, or should I only file WC in the other income section?
Good question. So yeah, no need to enter the two of them. You can just upload the W2C. That's the corrected form, and that'll be perfect.
Yep. I'm currently on F1 OPT. I worked as a volunteer researcher for a few months under my professor, and it was unpaid. My employer did not file an I-9 form. Do I still need to get a W2 for that? If not, what is the alternative?
Yeah, so you wouldn't need a W2 for that if it was a volunteer position and you didn't receive any payment for it. It'll just be Form 8843 that you need to submit, so you don't need any income document.
Yep. Okay. I'm on F1 OPT and submitted a W8 BEN for work I did. No taxes were withheld from my payment. How should I report this income, and do I need to request any form from the company?
Perfect. So the W8 Ben is the form that you would have completed to ensure that you're getting any tax treaty benefit that you're entitled to. And I'd assume that's why there was no tax withheld from your payment. There was a tax treaty benefit there for you. So what you need to do, you'll receive a W8 Ben for the income that you've received while on OPT, or sorry, not a W8 Ben, a W2. You'll receive the W2 and you'll upload that in step 3, and we'll prepare the relevant forms for you. So the only thing you need to request from the company, if you haven't already received it, is that W2, which outlines the income you've received during that year. It'll show that no tax was withheld, but that's absolutely fine if there was a tax treaty benefit there for you.
Mm. Okay. I've been working on campus part time throughout last year. I have a W2 for that. I also did a CPT in the summer, which was unpaid, like I mentioned previously. Is my understanding correct? On step 2, I say I have earned US dollars. But in this case, where can I mention of my unpaid CPT to get 8843 generated? Good question, Sharvari.
Absolutely, yeah. So in step two, yes, you're going to say you have received US income. And then what you do is you just upload the W-2. You don't need to indicate that you've done employment where you didn't receive income. You're only reporting your US source income. They're not concerned that, you did CPT and you didn't get paid for it. That doesn't matter in terms of your taxes. So it's just your W-2 that you received from the employer for that pay the on-campus work throughout the year. So just that W-2. In terms of the 8843, how do I mention the unpaid part to get the 8843? Because you've triggered the federal filing requirement, the 1040 NR, Form 8843 will be prepared with that. So it's not a case that you need to generate two separate forms. You just enter your information. We will generate all relevant forms for you. And Form 8843 will always be included with the 1040 NR. When you look in your tax pack, just scroll through the pages at the back of that 1040 NR, there will be an 8843 there as well.
Yeah. So if income was generated, you get with Sprintax, you get 1040 NR and 8843 included. But if there was no income, then you only get 8843, which you need to manually mail it for your taxes.
Exactly.
Okay. I received 4 W-2s, Oregon State, USC on-campus job, California CPT, and LA Metro, and no federal or state taxes were deducted. Do I need to file separate state returns for Oregon and California? Will Sprintax will cover all W-2 and both state returns for free since no taxes were withheld? Will I need to pay now? I'm worried about having to pay a large amount at once.
Great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's break it down, I suppose. You've received 4 W-2s. You definitely will be able to upload those 4 W-2s in step 3. So, we're going to ask you what income have you received, what income documents, how many of those income documents. So you will be able to upload those 4 W-2s. In terms of filing separate state returns, possibly we'll work that out for you in the state tax section. So once you provide details of the states you've lived in during that tax year, we will determine if you've triggered a state filing requirement or multiple state filing requirements, and we'll prepare the relevant forms for you. In terms of no taxes being withheld, that doesn't matter in terms of fees, we'll say. Like it's a case that it's your obligation to file your tax return. If you trigger a filing requirement, you must file your tax return. Whether you have had tax withheld or not is irrelevant. Your taxes, you'd hope would balance each year, but that's the whole idea of your tax return, is to make sure that everything's balanced, that you're compliant with your visa requirements. In terms of will I need to pay the fees, there are fees involved. So for a federal preparation, the fee is $54.95. Now, when you use that code UDI, that's going to save you $5 at checkout. For a state tax preparation, the fee is $49.95, and that is per state. So if you've triggered 2 state filing requirements, there would be a fee for each state. Now, what I will say is check with your school. A lot of the schools, we work with a huge number of schools across the US. There is a good chance that your school partner with Sprintax and may provide you with a code that will cover the full federal fee, and in some case, maybe a state fee as well. So do check and see. Obviously, UDI's got that $5 discount for you. So if you don't have a discount from your school, make sure to use that. But check and see if there is a discount available through your school. It might cover that fee in full on the federal side and possibly state, but you'll likely have to pay at least one of those state fees yourself.
Yeah, and you may owe large amount of tax.
It's possible, yeah, depending on the situation. But
Yeah,
the fact that you say no taxes were withheld, it may be that you have tax treaty benefits available to you and so on. So, that may be okay, but we'll work that out within your tax return.
yeah. Okay. I came last year, that is 2025. Since then, I haven't earned any income, but my brother, who is on H1B, is supporting me every month by sending some money. Should I also file 1040 NR along with 8843?
No. So in that case, you're going to say, no, you haven't received any US income in step two, and we'll generate the form 8843 for you. That's not going to be considered income. If somebody's supporting you like that, if it's income from outside the US, not reportable. If it's somebody within the US that's helping you out in this way, it's not considered income, so you don't need to report that.
Yep. Okay. Do I need to file for 8843 if I'm currently on a grace period after my OPT is expired? I've filed for I-485 adjustment of status, so I don't particularly have any visa status right now.
Yeah, so I suppose what you need to do is go in and fill in your details in Sprintax and we'll work that out for you. If you are still considered non-resident, then we'll prepare that Form 8843 for you. I suppose if you're not on a visa status at the moment, if you're not considered an exempt individual, say on an F, J, M, or Q visa, then the substantial presence test kicks in right away. So for the first 183 days, you'd be considered non-resident, but after that, you'd be considered resident. But the best thing to do is just go in and complete step one, and we'll work it out for you there.
Yep. Okay. Do we need to consider teaching assistantship and scholarship received as income, and will we receive W-2 for same?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you've received any income, it'll be reported on a W-2. Scholarship, if it's anything outside of tuition, then you'll likely receive a 1042-S document, and absolutely it should be included on your tax return.
Okay. If they haven't received it yet, what do they need to do?
Reach out and request that. Like a W-2, you should definitely have received by now. 1042-S, the deadline is March 15th, so it may be that the school haven't issued that as of yet, but you should be receiving that within the next 2 weeks. So, reach out and ask the question anyway. Am I due to receive this form? When will I receive it? They'll be able to give you a better idea. Some schools have issued that, from the beginning of January. Some are on the ball, so some leave it until closer to that deadline. So check with the school just to be sure.
Right. Right. One last question, unless we see other questions, but currently F1 student and switched the university, now doing an on-campus job, forgot to file tax on previous year. I need to file form 8843 and 1040 NR, correct?
Yeah, so if you received income in the year that you haven't filed for, then it will be the 1040 NR, in which case Form 8843 will be included. If you didn't receive any income, then it'll just be Form 8843. But you should catch up, for any year that you haven't filed. It is important that your tax record is correct and up to date for every year that you've been in the US.
Mm. Okay, one last question. Do I need to file tax as married filing separately or single if my spouse is a foreign citizen in a foreign country with no current or prior US visa or no SSN or no ITIN, married late December 2025?
Okay, so in that case, your spouse is not in the US or anything like that. You're just going to choose single. You're filing separately. As a non-resident, you can't file jointly. They weren't present at all in the US during that time, so just choose single in that case.
Mm, yep. I have 1095A from marketplace.gov. I shall be able to claim premium tax credits and subsidize my premium,
Yeah,
correct?
so enter that in Sprintax and we'll prepare the return offline for you. So you need to just go through the process, entering the information we require. When you get to that question asking if you have that Form 1095A, select yes. We'll ask you to email us a copy of that form and we'll update the return for you then. We'll let you know once that's ready and that'll be included for you.
Okay. For refund of FICA taxes, should we file both 843 and 8316?
Yeah, so again, if you're using Sprintax, we'll prepare those forms for you.
Yep. If my US citizen spouse file for my joint tax return for 2025, do I still need to file 8843 for year 2025?
No, you're fine. If you've been included on a resident tax return, then you're absolutely fine.
Yep. Okay, I will let you go. Questions will keep coming. My code is UDYUDI. So just type that, and you'll get email recording, etc. Everything. So just wait for like few minutes, and you'll get an email right after this. But again, thank you, Elvira, for doing this, and it's always pleasure to have you and answer all these questions.
You're very welcome. And anything that we haven't gotten to today, please do use the live chat, the knowledge base, the blog, the YouTube channel. There's tons of resources there for you. So don't be sitting there with your questions. There's tons of ways that you can get the answers that you need.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe Elvira, next time we should just do Q&A, because I feel like there are so many questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to do that.
All right, I'll let you go. Thank you again, everybody, and thank you, Elvira. I'm gonna end the stream, Elvira, if you want to stay for like a couple
Perfect.
seconds.
Great. Thanks,
Right.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Someone said you look like Princess Diana.
Thanks very much.
Irish. Okay. Well. Okay. All right.